To do his job, Death needs a distraction. He looks at the sky, focusing on dark chocolate, waxy yellow, or blinding white snow. It's the only way he can cope with the leftover humans. But every so often, a specific human catches his eye. In January 1939, a train stalls in the snow-choked German countryside. A 6-year-old boy suffers a violent coughing fit in the third carriage and dies. His 9-year-old sister, Liesel, watches his eyes freeze, locking her into a state of total numb shock. 2 days later, at the boy's burial, an apprentice gravedigger drops a small black object from his coat. As Liesel is dragged away from the dirt, she spots it, grabs it, and holds it tight. The book is a heavy, silent presence in her hands. While it is her only remaining link to her brother, the ink on the pages remains illegible. At 10 years old, she lacks the specific knowledge required to decode the symbols on the cover. Liesel is relocated to a foster home on Himmel Street, in a town called Mulching. It is a dreary stretch of cramped houses, dominated by her new foster mother, Rosa Huberman, a woman whose primary method of communication is shouting insults and wielding a wooden spoon. But the domestic abuse is secondary to the suffocating atmosphere outside the front door. The year is 1939, and the state's ideology seeps into every crevice of daily life, inescapable and absolute. Liesel turns 10, which brings mandatory enrollment in the band of German girls. She is fitted into a brown uniform, taught to march straight, and trained to ensure her Heil Hitler works flawlessly. The state demands total compliance, yet Liesel can barely process her own surroundings. She is a grieving child carrying a stolen book she cannot decipher, trapped in a violent society she does not understand. Under a regime that thrives on controlling information, an inability to read leaves Liesel entirely defenseless. She lacks the tools to articulate her trauma, leaving her completely voiceless. By 1933, the vast majority of the German population had fallen into step behind the Führer. The pressure to conform was total, enforced by neighbors, rallies, and the sheer momentum of crowds. This chart breaks down the political reality. He picks up the Gravedigger's Handbook. Instead of asking why she has a manual on burials, he simply asks if she wants to read it. By pulling up a chair at 2 a.m, Hans assumes the role of teacher. He and Liesel begin a partnership to dismantle the barrier of her illiteracy. There are immediate logistical problems. Hans left school in the 4th grade, meaning his own reading is slow and deliberate. To make matters worse, the text is a highly technical guide to burying corpses. They start entirely from scratch. Hans takes a piece of upturned sandpaper from his painting supplies, draws a square in the corner, and sketches a capital A with a thick painter's pencil. To make the letters stick, they attach them to familiar words. A becomes Apfel. When she struggles with S, she blurts out Salmensch, her foster mother's favorite insult, and Hans roars with laughter, sketching a crude picture to match. The lessons are loud, and Rose's tolerance for noise is remarkably low. To escape the constant yelling from the kitchen, Hans and Liesel relocate their midnight classes down to the Hubermans' shallow, poorly lit basement. When they run out of sandpaper, Hans brings down his paint cans and brushes. He calls out a word, and if Liesel can spell the new word correctly, she gets to paint the letters directly onto the concrete wall. Over the months, the cement walls fill with the alphabet, crude drawings, and drying paint. The dark storage space slowly morphs into a massive, physical dictionary. These hours in the basement build a new sense of agency. Each word painted on the concrete serves as a brick in a sanctuary where Liesel begins to formulate a voice of her own. Eventually, her basement education faces a public test. During a reading progress check at school, a strict nun named Sister Maria demands that the children take turns reading a passage aloud. Liesel forces her way to the front of the room, but as the bright sun hits the page, her nerves take over. The printed sentences dissolve, the letters blurring into a completely meaningless scramble. She refuses to stand there in silence. Taking a breath, she ignores the text in front of her and simply begins speaking. She recites a passage detailing proper shovel techniques from the Gravedigger's Handbook, entirely from memory. Sister Maria immediately snatches the book away and pulls Liesel into the corridor for a harsh physical beating. When she returns, a boy named Ludwig Schmeichel begins taunting her, cementing her public humiliation. The punishment breaks her, but it also crystallizes a harsh reality. Having words in her head isn't enough to protect her from the cruelty of the outside world. She has to actively wield them. During the break, the taunts continue until Liesel snaps. She grabs Ludwig's book, throws it away, and attacks him, kicking and swinging her fists wildly in the muddy schoolyard. Liesel spent months in the basement constructing an identity out of language. When Ludwig's mockery tries to reduce her to her former, powerless state, she protects that new self with the only tool she has left to assert her presence, her fists. And Death watches her. He observes a battered, mud-soaked girl standing in the rain, a girl who has decided that under no circumstances will she allow herself to remain a passive victim. Liesel began her journey by stealing a book she couldn't read out of the frozen snow. By turning those strange symbols into weapons of self-defense, she proves Death's greatest hope, that human defiance makes our existence worth witnessing.